In a quiet little town surrounded by soft hills and narrow streets, there lived a girl who often went unnoticed. She wasn't loud or talkative like others her age. She didn't wear fancy clothes or hang out at the market after school. She was the kind of person people saw every day but never really looked at. But if you ever stopped to watch closely, you'd see something different about her, something gentle and mysterious. Every evening, just before the sun dipped behind the trees, she would walk down a narrow path that led to an old park on the edge of town. In her hands, she carried a faded brown violin case. It looked too old, the edges worn and scratched, the handle patched with tape. Some people said it had no sound left in it. Others joked that maybe she carried it just to look special. But no one had ever really heard her play. She always chose the same spot near a broken stone bench under a tall tree. The light there was golden at sunset and the air felt calm. She would open her case carefully as if it carried something alive. Inside was a violin that had seen better days. The varnish was cracked and one of the strings looked newer than the others. But when she held it, her hands became steady. Her fingers would touch the wood softly, almost like she was greeting an old friend. Then she would lift the bow, close her eyes for a moment, and begin to play. The sound that came out was gentle, like a whisper at first. It wasn't loud or showy, but it had a warmth that filled the air. The few people who passed by would sometimes slow down to listen, though they never stayed long. Some would smile quietly before continuing their way home. Others didn't understand what she was playing, but felt something deep they couldn't explain. Most evenings, she played alone. The town wasn't cruel, but it was the kind of place where people noticed only what they wanted to notice. The girl's father worked at a small workshop fixing chairs and tables. Her mother had been a music teacher once many years ago before she passed away. That old violin had been hers. After she was gone, the instrument was left in a box for months until one day, the girl opened it and tried to play. She didn't take lessons from anyone. She learned by memory, by sound, by heart. Sometimes late at night, her father would stand outside her room door, listening. He never said much about it. He'd just nod quietly when she played. It reminded him of the woman he had loved and the way music used to fill their home. But for the girl, playing wasn't about remembering. It was about feeling less alone. When she played, it was like the world slowed down. At school, though, things were different. The other students didn't understand her silence. They whispered things behind her back, made jokes about her old violin, and laughed when she carried it on her shoulder every day. They called her strange, said she lived in her own world. Once, during a group activity, one of them asked her why she bothered playing such an old instrument when she'd never be good enough to go anywhere with it. She didn't answer. She just smiled slightly and looked out the window. The truth was, she didn't play to prove anything. She played because something inside her told her to. The sound made her feel connected, to her mother, to the world, to something invisible that others couldn't see. There were evenings when she'd play in the park while the wind picked up and carried the sound across the quiet streets. The people sitting in their homes would sometimes hear it faintly through the open windows and wonder where it came from. Some said it sounded sad. Others said it felt peaceful, like a voice from another time. One day while she was playing, a little boy stopped near her bench. He was carrying a bag of bread from the bakery, probably running an errand for his family. He listened for a while, wide-eyed, and when she stopped, he asked shyly, "Why do you play alone?" She looked at him for a moment, unsure how to answer. Then she said softly, "Because the music listens." The boy didn't understand, but he smiled and ran off, leaving her words hanging in the air. The girl didn't know it, but people had started to notice her more. The shopkeeper near the park sometimes leaned against his door at sunset, waiting to hear her first note. The old woman who sold flowers nearby would hum along. Even the stray dogs that roamed around the park would lie down quietly when she played, as if the music made them feel safe. But not everyone appreciated it. Some teenagers from the school began to tease her more often. They'd follow her halfway to the park, pretending to play invisible violins, mocking her bow movements and laughing loudly. Sometimes they'd shout, "Play us something that actually sounds good." She'd keep walking, pretending not to hear. It hurt, of course, but she had learned to carry silence like a shield. Her world wasn't built from their noise. It was built from sound and feeling. There was one particular evening when everything seemed heavier. It had been a rough day at school. A teacher had criticized her handwriting in front of everyone, and some classmates laughed. She walked home slower than usual. Her father wasn't home yet. Work had kept him late. She put her bag on the table, looked at her violin case, and sighed. For a moment, she thought about skipping practice that day. But something made her go anyway. Maybe it was the quiet outside or the way the last light touched the street. She carried her violin to the park as she always did. That evening, the sky was painted in deep orange and purple shades. The park was empty. She sat down, opened the case, and placed the violin on her shoulder. The first sound she made was uneven. Her hands trembled a little, and she paused. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and started again. This time, the melody that came out was different. It wasn't soft or calm. It was deep, full of all the emotions she had kept inside for so long. The pain, the loneliness, the small joys, the memories of her mother's voice. The sound rose higher, filling the empty air with something powerful. If anyone had been there, they would have felt it. The way her music carried the weight of everything she never said aloud. She played until it got dark. Her fingers ached and her arms felt heavy. But she didn't stop. It was as if she needed the music to breathe. When she finally stopped, the air around her felt different, like something had changed. The park lights flickered on, and she saw a man standing at the far end of the path, frozen in place. He was holding a newspaper under his arm, probably on his way home. He didn't move for a while, just stood there watching her. When their eyes met, he simply nodded and walked away. She didn't know who he was or why he had stopped, but something about that moment stayed with her. Later that night, when she reached home, her father was sitting at the table waiting. He looked tired but smiled when he saw the violin in her hands. "You played again?" he asked. She nodded. He looked down at the floor and said quietly, "Your mother would have been proud." She didn't reply. She just placed the violin back in its case and whispered, "I hope she can still hear it." That night, as she lay in bed, the sound of her music still lingered in her mind. The laughter of her classmates, the teasing, the loneliness, they all seemed smaller now. What mattered was that when she played, the world listened in its own way. Maybe not through applause or attention, but through silence. And even though she didn't know it yet, her music had already begun to reach hearts she never expected. The man who had stopped at the park that evening couldn't forget what he'd heard. The sound followed him home, replaying in his mind. By the next morning, he would tell others about the girl with the old violin whose music changed the air. But for now, she slept peacefully, unaware that her quiet gift had already begun to stir something extraordinary. The next morning, the town looked the same as always. People hurried to work, the shopkeepers opened their doors, and the same children ran past the fountain. But something small had changed. Someone had heard her play the night before, and that sound was still echoing in their mind. The man who had stopped at the park couldn't forget the way her music filled the air. He worked as a part-time sound technician at the community center, where local events were often held. He didn't know who the girl was, but he knew her sound was something rare. At the same time, the girl went about her day quietly. She got ready for school, packed her books, and carried her violin case like she always did. The teasing started again as soon as she entered the schoolyard. Two boys made fake bow movements in the air and laughed. One girl said loudly, "Here comes the little violin queen." Others just smiled behind her back. She didn't reply. She never did. She took her seat by the window and opened her notebook. The teacher spoke about things she tried hard to focus on, but her mind often drifted to melodies. Sometimes she'd draw little notes on the side of her pages or imagine songs inside her head. It was her way of escaping without leaving the room. That afternoon, on her way home, she stopped by a small store to buy a piece of bread. The shopkeeper, an older woman with kind eyes, looked at her and said, "I heard someone playing violin near the park last night. Was that you?" The girl hesitated, then nodded. The woman smiled. "You play beautifully, child." It felt like the wind stopped just to listen. Her face warmed with a shy smile. Compliments were rare in her world, and those words stayed in her heart like a quiet light. A few days passed. The teasing at school continued, but she had grown used to it. She found her peace in the evenings when she played. The air, the leaves, and the sound of her violin were her only friends. One morning, a poster appeared on the notice board at school. It was for a regional music competition, sponsored by the town council. The winner would receive a scholarship to a well-known music program in the city. Everyone gathered around the board talking excitedly. "You should join," one boy said jokingly to her, his voice full of sarcasm. "Maybe that old violin of yours will surprise the judges." The others laughed. She smiled faintly and said nothing. But that night, as she sat by her window, she couldn't stop thinking about it. A scholarship? The chance to learn from real teachers? To play on a real stage? It sounded impossible, but a small voice inside her whispered, "Why not try?" Her father came home late that night. As he ate dinner, she quietly mentioned the competition. "They're taking sign-ups this week," she said softly. "Maybe I could join." He looked at her for a moment, unsure. "Do you want to?" She nodded. "Just once. I don't want to win. I just want to see how it feels to play for people." He thought for a long time, then sighed. "If it's what you want, then go ahead. Your mother would have told you to try." She smiled gently. The next day, she wrote her name on the sign-up sheet. When her classmates saw it, they couldn't stop laughing. "You're serious?" one of them said. "You'll embarrass yourself." She didn't reply. Her silence always confused them, and that somehow made them laugh harder. But she wasn't angry. She just knew something they didn't. That music wasn't about proving anything. It was about sharing something real. That week, she practiced harder than ever before. Every evening, she played in the park until it was too dark to see. Sometimes her fingers hurt, but she didn't stop. She listened carefully to every note, trying to make it sound just right. One evening, while she was playing, she noticed the same man from before standing near the park entrance again. This time, he came closer and waited until she finished. "You have a gift," he said quietly, "the kind that can move people without saying a word." She looked down, unsure what to say. He continued, "I work at the community center. We're hosting the first round of that music competition next week. If you're joining, I'll make sure you have a chance to perform." Her eyes widened slightly and she nodded gratefully. "Thank you," she said softly. He smiled. "Don't thank me. Just play the way you always do. Let them hear the air change." Those words stayed in her mind all week. When she practiced, she remembered them. The day of the competition arrived quickly. The community hall was decorated with banners and lights. Inside, there were rows of chairs filled with parents, students, and townspeople. The judges sat at a long table in front, their papers and pens ready. Backstage, the girl waited quietly, holding her violin close. Around her, the other contestants tuned their instruments. Some had shiny new violins, polished shoes, and confident smiles. Their families stood nearby, whispering encouragement. She stood alone, calm but nervous. Her heart beat fast, but her hands were steady. When her name was called, a few people in the audience whispered to each other. Some recognized her as the quiet girl from the park. A few laughed softly, expecting little. She walked slowly to the stage, her shoes making faint sounds on the wooden floor. The lights were bright and she could feel dozens of eyes watching. For a moment, fear almost stopped her. Then she remembered her mother. She remembered the evenings spent learning alone, the sound of the wind in the park and her father's quiet support. She took a deep breath, placed the violin under her chin, and lifted the bow. The first note was soft, trembling slightly. Then came another, clearer this time. The hall, once full of chatter, began to fall silent. As she continued, her music began to tell its own story, a story of loneliness, love, and hope. The sound wasn't perfect. It wasn't loud or polished, but it was alive. Every note felt like a piece of her heart. Her fingers moved as if guided by memory, her bow gliding gently like wind through grass. The judges leaned forward, their expressions slowly changing. The audience, who had expected something awkward, found themselves unable to move. The laughter had vanished. Even the children stopped fidgeting. The music filled every corner of the room, soft but powerful, delicate but deep. When she played the last note, it lingered in the air longer than it should have. Then came silence, complete, breathtaking silence. For a few seconds, no one clapped. They just sat there, caught between surprise and awe. Then slowly, people began to applaud. Not loudly, but sincerely. The man from the park stood at the back of the hall, smiling with pride. The girl bowed slightly and walked off the stage. Her hands were trembling now, not from fear, but from the strange energy that had filled her while playing. Backstage, she sat down and closed her eyes. She didn't know if she'd win or not, but it didn't matter. She had finally shared her music, and the world had listened. After the competition ended, she was packing her violin when one of the judges came to speak to her. He was an older man with kind eyes. "You reminded me why I fell in love with music," he said softly. "You don't just play notes. You play feelings." She didn't know how to reply, so she just smiled and said thank you. That night, when she walked home, the streets were quiet. The stars were out and the cool air brushed against her face. Her father was waiting by the door. "How was it?" he asked gently. She smiled. It felt like the world listened. He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening just a little. They sat together for a while without saying much. The house was small, but for the first time it felt full. The next morning, people at school didn't laugh as they usually did. Some of them had been at the competition and had seen what she could do. They didn't know what to say, so they said nothing at all. But in their silence, she could sense a quiet respect. Later that week, the results were announced. She didn't come in first place. She didn't even win a trophy. But one of the judges had written a note beside her name, the kind of music that changes the air, and that meant more to her than any prize ever could. That night, as she played in the park again, a few people stopped to listen. They didn't laugh. They didn't whisper. They just stood there quietly, letting the music touch something inside them. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. The girl who once played alone was about to show the world that sometimes the smallest sound can carry the biggest truth. The morning after the competition, the girl woke up with a strange feeling in her chest. It wasn't disappointment or sadness. It was something quieter, like peace. She didn't win, but she didn't feel like she lost either. The applause she heard the night before still echoed softly in her heart. For the first time, she felt seen. At school, things were different. The same classmates who used to laugh at her didn't meet her eyes. Some even looked guilty when she walked by. During lunch, one girl came over and said softly, "You played really beautifully." It was the first kind word she had ever received from her. The girl smiled and thanked her, then returned to her quiet corner. She still went to the park every evening, as she always did. But this time, more people came to listen. Some brought their children, others sat quietly with their evening tea. A few even clapped after she finished. She didn't play for attention, but it felt good to know that her music was reaching hearts now. One evening, as she played under the tall tree, she noticed the man from the community center again. He was standing near the bench, listening with a thoughtful look. When she finished, he walked up to her and said, "There's someone I want you to meet." She looked curious. "There's a local orchestra that's performing next month," he said. "They're looking for a young solo performer to play with them. I think you should audition." Her eyes widened. "Me?" He nodded. "Yes, you. Don't think about how old your violin is or how simple your clothes are. Just think about how your music makes people feel. That's what matters." She hesitated, unsure if she was ready for something that big, but the thought of playing with a real orchestra, surrounded by musicians, filled her with excitement and fear all at once. That night, she told her father about the offer. He didn't speak for a few moments. Then he said softly, "If your heart says yes, then go. Don't let fear stop you. Your mother would tell you the same." So she agreed. For the next few weeks, she practiced every day, even harder than before. The sound of her violin filled their small house from morning until night. Sometimes neighbors stopped outside to listen. Her father would smile quietly, proud but worried too. He knew how fragile her confidence was, how easily words could break it. The day of the audition came sooner than she expected. The hall was much larger than the one where she had performed before. The walls were high and the seats stretched far back. Musicians were walking around tuning their instruments, their polished violins shining under the lights. She felt small among them. When it was her turn, she walked onto the stage, her hands trembling slightly. She looked out at the empty seats and took a deep breath. She remembered the park, the tree, the air that always listened. Then she began to play. The sound started soft but soon grew fuller, reaching every corner of the hall. The conductor, standing near the front, watched her carefully. When she finished, there was a moment of silence, then a few quiet nods. Afterward, one of the organizers approached her and said, "We'll let you know soon." She left the hall feeling unsure. The other musicians looked more confident, more trained. She was just a girl who had learned on her own, playing an old violin passed down by her mother. But as she walked home, she remembered something the man had told her. "Don't think about what you don't have. Think about what your music gives." 3 days later, she got the news. She had been chosen to perform with the orchestra. Her father read the letter twice before believing it. He hugged her gently and said, "You did it. You made them listen." She smiled through tears. "I just played what I felt." The town soon heard about it. The same people who once laughed now told others proudly that she was from their neighborhood. The school even made an announcement about her upcoming performance. Some of the students who used to tease her now asked when they could come watch. She didn't hold anger in her heart. She only felt grateful that her music had changed something in them too. The weeks before the concert were filled with rehearsals. She would travel to the city twice a week, sitting quietly on the bus with her violin case on her lap. At first, she felt out of place among the other musicians. They talked easily, laughed, and read sheet music like a language she didn't fully know. But when she played, they stopped and listened. Slowly, they began to smile at her, offering help, asking questions about her old violin. The conductor, a tall man with gray hair and kind eyes, noticed her right away. "You don't play like someone who learned from books," he said one day during rehearsal. "You play like someone who learned from life." She didn't know what to say, so she just bowed her head. Each day she grew more confident. The sound of the orchestra behind her made her heart race. It was like being part of something larger, something alive. Finally, the night of the concert arrived. The grand hall was filled with people. The lights glowed softly and the air buzzed with quiet excitement. Her father sat in the front row, his hands folded tightly, his eyes shining with pride and nervousness. When her turn came, she walked to the center of the stage. The conductor gave her a small nod. Then, as the first soft notes rose from her violin, the hall grew still. The orchestra joined her and the music swelled. Her melody soared above it, weaving through the sound like sunlight through clouds. Every note carried her story, her mother's memory, her lonely evenings in the park, the laughter she had endured, and the strength she had found. People in the audience felt it. Some closed their eyes. Some held their breath. It was as if the air itself had changed again, trembling with emotion. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was deep and full. Then came the applause, loud, thunderous, and real. The girl stood there frozen for a moment, her heart pounding. She looked at her father in the crowd, and he was clapping with tears in his eyes. That night after the concert, several people came to meet her. Among them was a journalist from the city who wanted to write about her story. "You have something rare," he said. "Your music speaks without words." She smiled shyly, still unsure how to handle so much attention. Later, when the crowd had left and the hall grew quiet again, she stayed for a moment, looking around the empty seats. The lights had dimmed and the stage felt peaceful. She lifted her violin and played one last soft tune, just for herself. When she went home that night, her father was waiting with warm tea. He looked at her and said, "You made the world listen tonight." She smiled. "It wasn't me. It was the music." He shook his head gently. "No, it was both." The following week, her story spread beyond the town. People from nearby cities started coming to see her play in the park. Some said they hadn't felt music like that in years, but she didn't let the attention change her. She still went to the same spot under the tree every evening, still played to the wind, to the air, to her mother's memory. Sometimes, the little boy who had once stopped to ask why she played alone came back to listen too. This time he didn't ask questions. He just sat quietly, smiling. The town that once laughed now listened. The same people who once doubted her now told their children to follow their hearts. And though she didn't say it aloud, the girl felt grateful. Not for the applause, but for the silence that her music created in people's hearts. Because in that silence, they finally heard what she had been saying all along. Her journey was only beginning, but already she had done something most people never could. She had turned pain into beauty, loneliness into connection, and sound into something that could heal. And though she didn't know what waited ahead, she carried her violin like a promise. Wherever life took her, she knew one thing for sure. When she played, the world changed, even if just for a moment. That night, as she walked home with the stars above and the soft wind brushing past her, she smiled quietly to herself. Somewhere in the distance, a voice seemed to whisper through the air, soft, loving, familiar. It was almost like her mother's voice saying, "Keep playing. The world is listening." Weeks passed after the concert, but the sound of that night still lived in people's hearts. The town that once ignored her now spoke her name with admiration. Everywhere she went, someone would stop her to say they had heard her play, or that her music had made them feel something they couldn't explain. But for her, life hadn't changed much. She still walked the same narrow roads, carried the same old violin, and played at the same park every evening. What had changed was the way people listened. The laughter was gone. Now when she began to play, people grew quiet. The air itself seemed to wait. One afternoon, as she returned from school, she found an envelope waiting on their doorstep. It was thicker than usual, with a seal she didn't recognize. Her father opened it with careful hands. Inside was a letter from a music foundation in the city. They had read about her story in a newspaper article and wanted to offer her a chance to study under a respected music mentor. The lessons would be free. Her father read the letter twice before looking at her. "This is something special," he said quietly. "It's what your mother always dreamed of for you." The girl's heart raced. She had never imagined learning from real teachers, surrounded by real musicians. For a moment, she was speechless. Then she whispered, "Can we afford to go?" Her father smiled faintly. "We'll make it work. For music, we always will." And so, every weekend, she began traveling to the city for her lessons. The journey was long, 2 hours by bus each way, but she didn't mind. She would watch the world pass by through the window, humming softly to herself. Her teacher was a calm, older man who had performed in orchestras around the world. When she first played for him, he didn't interrupt. He listened until the last note faded. Then he said gently, "You play like someone who has already lived 1,000 lives. Don't ever lose that." He began teaching her not just technique but the language behind the music, the stories hidden inside every piece. She practiced scales and patterns, but more than that, she learned how to listen deeply. Some days, he asked her to close her eyes and imagine the sound of rain, or wind moving through trees, then play what she felt. At first, she thought it was strange, but soon she began to understand. Music wasn't just about notes. It was about emotion. It was about life. The teacher grew fond of her dedication. He told the foundation about her progress, and soon, invitations began to arrive for her to perform at small events. She was nervous at first, but each time she played, the crowd grew larger, the applause stronger. People said there was something unexplainable about the way her music filled a room. Back home, her father kept every newspaper clipping that mentioned her name. He had never been a man of many words, but now his eyes shone with quiet pride. Still, fame never changed her. She continued to return to the same park after every performance, sitting under the tall tree and playing softly as the sun went down. Children would run around her, couples would walk by, and old people would sit quietly listening. She didn't ask for money or attention. She just played. One evening, as she finished her song, an elderly woman approached her. She was holding a small photograph in her hand. "You remind me of someone," the woman said. "Your sound, it's just like hers." The girl looked at the picture. It was old and faded, showing a woman holding a violin. Her breath caught. She recognized the same design on the violin's edge, the same tiny carving near the bridge. "That's my mother," the girl whispered. The woman smiled with tears in her eyes. "She taught me years ago when I was a child. I never forgot her kindness." She placed a trembling hand on the girl's shoulder. "You have her soul in your music. Keep playing. She's still listening." That night, the girl went home with tears in her eyes. She placed her violin on her lap and whispered softly, "I hope you're proud of me." Then she began to play, and though the room was silent, she could almost feel her mother's presence beside her. Weeks later, another letter arrived, this time from a television network. They wanted to feature her in a live performance segment about young talents who inspire through their art. Her father looked at her with pride and worry. "This will be your biggest stage yet," he said. She nodded. "I'll play like I always do, for her, for everyone who listens." The day of the broadcast came quickly. The studio lights were bright and the cameras surrounded her. For the first time, she felt the weight of being watched by thousands. Her hands trembled as she tuned her violin. The director gave a countdown. 3, 2, 1. She closed her eyes and let everything fade, the lights, the cameras, the noise. She remembered the sound of the wind in the park, the golden light on her mother's face, the quiet pride in her father's eyes. Then she played. The music flowed like a river, calm and full of life. The audience in the studio fell silent, and those watching at home could feel it too. It was as if her sound reached through the screen, touching hearts far away. When she finished, there was a moment of stillness. Then the entire room rose in applause. Even the host had tears in his eyes. The video spread quickly across the country. People called her the girl who played like the air could listen. Messages started arriving, letters, emails, even small gifts from strangers. Some said her music reminded them of loved ones they had lost. Others said it gave them peace when they needed it most. Each message humbled her. She read them with quiet gratitude but never saw herself as famous. She only saw herself as a girl who played her mother's violin. Her teacher called her one afternoon and said, "You've touched more people than you'll ever know. But remember, the real beauty of music is not in how many people hear it. It's in how honestly you play it." She carried those words with her. Months later, she was invited to perform at a charity concert in the city's largest hall. The event was meant to raise funds for children who wanted to study music but couldn't afford instruments. She didn't hesitate to accept. "I'll play for them," she said. "Maybe one day, one of them will play for others too." On the night of the concert, the hall was filled with people from every walk of life. Her father sat in the front row again, holding the same pride he had carried since the first time he heard her play. When the lights dimmed, she stepped onto the stage. For a moment, she looked out at the crowd and smiled. Then she lifted her violin and began to play. The sound was soft at first, like a whisper. Then it grew, rising higher, weaving through the orchestra behind her. Every note carried warmth and hope. It wasn't just music anymore, it was her heart speaking to theirs. By the time the last note faded, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The applause was thunderous, but she didn't bow for long. She simply smiled, whispered, "Thank you," and walked off quietly. Backstage, her teacher hugged her and said, "You've done something beautiful tonight. Your mother's legacy lives in you." Later, when she returned home, she found her father sitting outside looking up at the stars. She sat beside him. For a while, they didn't speak. Then he said softly, "Do you hear that?" She listened. The night was quiet, but there was a faint echo in the wind, like distant music. She smiled and whispered, "Yes." She's still playing. The stars above seemed to shine brighter, as if they too were listening. From that night on, the girl's music wasn't just known in her town. It was felt everywhere. People who had never met her spoke about the way her music made them stop and breathe, the way it softened something inside them. But for her, nothing mattered more than the feeling she got each time she played, the feeling that her mother was still near, that her music could change not just the air, but hearts too. And so every evening, no matter how big the stage or how far the city, she always returned to the same park when she could. Under the same tall tree, she'd play softly into the wind, just as she had before anyone knew her name. Because that was where it all began. And that was where the air first learned how to listen. Time passed, and the girl's life had changed in ways she had never imagined. She was no longer the quiet, overlooked child walking through the streets with her old violin case. People knew her name, recognized her talent, and admired her courage. But in her heart she remained the same, still the girl who played for the wind, for her mother, and for the quiet spaces in life where music lived. One morning, she received a call from a famous musician in the city. He had heard about her performances and wanted to meet her. She was nervous but excited. Her father encouraged her, saying, "Go. This is another chance to share what you feel." When she arrived, she found a large studio filled with instruments, sheet music, and people she had only seen in magazines. The musician was kind and gentle. He listened carefully as she played, letting each note flow freely. When she finished, he smiled. "I have performed on many stages and met countless musicians," he said. "But your music, it is alive. It tells stories, paints pictures, and touches the soul. You are extraordinary." She felt a warmth in her chest she had never felt before. It wasn't pride or arrogance, it was understanding. She realized that her music was not about recognition or fame. It was about connection. Every note she played reached someone's heart, and that was all that mattered. Soon, Invitations began arriving from far and wide. She was asked to perform in other cities, at festivals, in schools, and even at charity events for children who, like her once, had no one to notice their talent. She accepted them all, but she remained humble, carrying her mother's violin wherever she went. Even with all the attention, she returned to her park whenever she could. It was her sanctuary. The wind still whispered through the trees. The stone bench still waited beneath the tall tree, and the quiet air still seemed to listen to her music. The children who once laughed at her now sat nearby, wide-eyed, learning to respect the beauty of patience and dedication. One evening as she played, a young girl approached her, holding a small, worn violin. "I want to play like you someday," she said softly. The girl knelt down and smiled. "Then start today. Play for yourself first, and the world will hear you when you are ready." The girl's heart swelled. She realized that this, teaching others, inspiring them, showing them that music could live in anyone, was just as important as performing on any stage. It wasn't about applause, it was about opening hearts. Months passed, and one day she received a letter from an international music festival. They wanted her to perform alongside well-known musicians from all over the world. Her father read it aloud, tears glistening in his eyes. "Your mother would have been so proud," he said. The night of the festival arrived. The hall was grand, far larger than any she had played in before. Hundreds of people filled the seats. She felt a tremor of fear, but she closed her eyes and took a deep breath, imagining the park, the tree, the quiet evenings, and the wind that had always listened to her music. When she lifted her violin, she played as she always had, letting the notes carry her heart's story. The music filled the hall, moving through every corner, touching every listener. It wasn't just technical perfection. It was emotion, honesty, life itself poured into sound. People wept, some with smiles, some with awe. Even the most experienced musicians watched her with wonder. For a few moments, the world was still, as if the air itself had paused to listen. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, yet she felt calm. She knew, finally, that she had shared what mattered most. It wasn't recognition, awards, or fame. It was the connection she made, note by note, with every listener. Later, backstage, the famous musician from the city hugged her. "You've done more than play music tonight," he said. "You've reminded people why music matters. You've reminded them how to feel." She smiled quietly, her hand still clutching her violin. "I just play what I feel," she said. In the days that followed, messages arrived from people across the country and the world. Some wrote about how her music helped them through sadness, how it gave them courage or reminded them of loved ones. She read each letter carefully, sometimes with tears in her eyes. Through it all, she stayed grounded. She still returned to her park, where the wind, the trees, and the old stone bench reminded her of the very beginning. She still played for the quiet air, for herself, and for the memory of her mother, who had given her this gift in a way no one else could. One evening, the little boy who had first stopped to ask why she played alone returned, now a little older. He had learned a few notes on his small violin. He looked at her shyly. "You taught me something without even knowing it," he said softly. The girl smiled. "Then keep playing. The world will listen when you play from your heart." She realized then that her journey had come full circle. She had started alone, ignored, mocked even. And now not only had she touched countless lives, but she had inspired others to find their own music, to play even when no one was watching. Years passed, and she continued to perform across towns, cities, and countries. She taught music to children who couldn't afford lessons. She played at hospitals, at charity events, in schools, and in grand halls. Every time she performed, she carried the same sincerity, the same honesty, the same soul in her music that she had when she first opened her mother's violin case. Her father grew older, but he never missed a performance he could attend. He would sit quietly, eyes shining with pride, knowing that his daughter had fulfilled what he had always seen in her heart. One evening, after a particularly moving concert, she returned to the park where it all began. The sun was setting and the sky was painted in shades of orange and pink. She set up her violin, her fingers touching it with care. She played not for applause, not for recognition, but simply because the music lived inside her. The air seemed to respond. The wind swirled gently through the leaves. Birds rested quietly nearby. Even the distant town felt still, listening. She closed her eyes, feeling the connection between her heart, her violin, and the world around her. She whispered softly, "I hope you can hear this," and thought of her mother. It was then she realized something profound. Her music had become larger than herself. It had reached places she would never see, touched people she would never meet, and healed hearts in ways she could not measure. Yet it remained intimate, personal, and deeply human. As night fell, she packed her violin and walked home, her heart full. She knew that no matter where life took her, the music would always guide her, and in every note, in every quiet pause, in every melody carried by the wind, she could feel it, the invisible presence of love, memory, and life itself. She had started as the quiet girl no one noticed. But through persistence, love, and honesty, she had shown the world something rare. She had taught them that music isn't just sound, it is connection. It is feeling. It is life shared. And as she walked under the stars, her father by her side, she smiled softly. She thought about all the people who had laughed at her, doubted her, or ignored her. She forgave them silently. They hadn't seen it coming, but that was okay, because she had changed the air. She had changed hearts, and she had played every note with love. The girl who once played alone had grown into someone who carried the world in her music. And in the quiet, as she looked up at the night sky, she whispered one last time, "Thank you," knowing the air, the wind, and her mother's memory had listened all along.